Hello and welcome to the Healthified Family Podcast. This is part two of our discussion on wisdom and tidbits of wisdom that we have gained as parents of 10 children. So, part two of our discussion, this is going to be episode 4 of the Healthified Family Podcast. My name is Corey, and this is my lovely wife, Christy.
Hello.
And jump back into the discussion and go from there. So I think we're in a new phase of our parenting experience as we've both been learning about masculinity and femininity more in detail, and in trying to put those principles into practice in our lives, because kids are so much a part of our lives. It's like we are also seeking to put that in practice in our parenting, and it's kind of opening a whole new field of experimentation, I would call it, because that's all you do as a parent really is every day is a new day, and your children are one day older, and so you just try and do your best and experiment with what you think will work the best and learn from the results.
Ways you can gain more wisdom as a parent. I really think it's important to always be learning. And I read a lot of books, parenting books, life, self-help books, but even novels and whatever. Like, I read a lot. I read with the kids, but I also read or listen to books as well. And I'm always learning new things from those books. And these are, these people writing books, they have life experience. A lot of them have wisdom and little gems that I haven't, experienced yet. My oldest is 15. Maybe these guys have all their kids married, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
They have more knowledge and wisdom. Maybe they're even younger than me, but they have different life experiences that gave them some different understanding and pieces of wisdom to share. And so as I read and listen, I'm evaluating, hey, how can I apply that? And my kids, our kids, they thank me for that. They liked when I'm listening to books in the car, because I drive them to different activities and stuff, and I usually have an audiobook going in the car. And a lot of times they're like, "Ooh, no, Mom, don't listen while we're gone. Like, I want to hear this part." They think it's interesting. And then they can tell, like, "Oh, you're using that, like, tactic or whatever that you learned." I'm like, it's not a tactic. I'm not like, "Ooh, I'm trying to, like, manipulate you." I'm just trying to help be a better parent. And they actually appreciate it. They're like, "I know what you're doing, but I'm glad you're doing it." Like, the older ones, Luke, Liza, David. The younger ones even sometimes will go, "Hey, that's like that book." I'm like, yeah, it's like that book. So learning, being aware, watching YouTube videos about things. I just watched a podcast the other day that gave some tidbits that I was like, wow, that was talking about how we nag and prod our kids all the time, and we don't even realize we're doing it, right? We're like, "Now, Johnny, go get your shoes on. Now, Johnny, go get your shoes on. Johnny, how many times do I have to tell you, get your shoes on," right?
Have you done your chore?
If we say it once,
have you done your chore?
Right? We should only have to say it once. If we say it once and we know that they heard, they were connected when we said it, get their attention, look them in the eyes. It's time to get your shoes on. And then there's consequences if they don't, right? Okay, well, now, whatever the natural consequences, you're late for your activity, or now you have to stay in the car because you don't have shoes on, or whatever it is, right? There's going to be some kind of natural consequence. It's not like a punishment, but they're going to have to experience what happens when you don't listen. Maybe we don't even get to go to the park. I know you wanted to go, but you didn't get your shoes on. Sorry, can't go, right? And then the prodding's a little different than the nagging. The prodding is like, "Don't forget that next week you have that assignment due. hey, have you worked on your assignment? So is your assignment ready to go? Okay, it's the day before your assignment. Is it ready? Right? Well, then the kid's like, I don't have to think about my assignment. Mom's going to remind me like 6 times. So I'll get it done whenever. They don't set an internal, they don't put any weight on that thing themselves because they know you're just going to remind them. And so it sets them up to be lazy adults who only do what they want to do when they feel like doing it, and they wait for somebody
So
else to remind them.
would you say it's a disempowering practice?
Absolutely.
It disempowers children in their ability to get things done in their life,
Yeah.
because they become dependent on you to
Right.
get to make sure they get things done in their life.
Yeah, and I had a discussion with them. I said, okay, I listened to this podcast. I think it was really great. I'm sorry I have failed in this area. I have been nagging and prodding your whole lives, and I'm done. I mean, I will probably still do it because it's a habit, but I'm trying to phase out of that, and you guys can help me as I phase out of that. And then I explained, here's what I'm going to do instead. So the
I
last
mean, it's
2
another
days,
version of the helicopter mother, the
yeah,
helicopter parent. It's
right,
just an iteration of it. So
right. And I said, I can't, I basically have 12 people's schedules in my head at all times. I have to know when the twins go down for a nap and have they been changed yet? And do they, I need to get them out of their high chairs and they have to be fed. And have they, where are they? Because maybe they're getting into something like, so that, and then everybody else in the family, when they need to be where and when they have what due and when I have to turn in, things, and when is your lunch made? Did you take your lunch? It's like 12 people's schedules going through my head at all times. And the whole family's like happy to let mom take care of all of that. And so I'm always a little more
and here's the thing,
frazzled.
moms don't want to be taking care of all that, but trying to nag everyone to do all these little things
Yeah,
means that, well,
because
mom's the
we
ultimate
nag and
reminder.
prod them to do it. And so I'm like, I'm going to step back. I'm not going to remind dad to take his lunch. If dad forgets his lunch, dad's going to have the natural consequence of being hungry. I can't do that anymore. I'm not going to remind David to sweep the floor. If that's his chore, David sweeps the floor. If he doesn't sweep, I'll call him. And he goes, David, come here, please. He comes. Yeah, Mom. I look at the floor. Oh, I need to sweep, don't I? I don't have to say anything, right? And the same thing with like, hey, girls, every day you practice your violin. Charlotte, Clara, yes, Mom? Look at their violins. Oh, it's time to practice my violin. And after a little while, it becomes habit, and I don't even have to call and remind them with my eyes. But instead of saying 16 times, girls, practice your violin. Have you practiced yet? Girls, you haven't practiced your violin yet, right? Like, that's just exhausting for them and for me. And so, yeah, there's some things that I'm learning 15 years into parenting, just learned it this week. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to
I mean,
implement
there's
that.
so much. There's like, we're still learning to put that one into practice. You just heard this podcast this week,
Right.
but it's like, it seems to be like a huge. I think what it boils down to is the power of expectation.
Absolutely.
Children behave as expected, but how do you manage your expectations? Because again, like, you're trying to expect them to get something done, but really what you're expecting them is to only do it when you finally nag them and get on them.
Right.
Like,
And that's something that we
the
started.
warped expectation from what you actually, like, what you think you expect is different from what you actually expect, because what you actually expect is dependent upon your actions.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's dependent on what you're going to do. And then they'll respond according to you. And that's something we learned way early on in parenting is don't count. Because if you count, Johnny's always going to wait till 3, like,
Whatever the
I'm
number
counting to
is.
3. All right, Susie, 1, 2. okay, Susie knows she has to come on 3. Susie doesn't come the first time mommy calls because mommy is going to count to 3. Right? So you're setting that expectation. And we learned that very early on, and we were like, okay, I'm not counting, and we don't. Like, sometimes I count, everybody better be down here in 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're like, they don't know how fast I'm gonna count. Like, and so that has power for me because I rarely ever
Rarely
use it,
do it.
right? But if I used it every time, you think they'd come until they absolutely, they'd get to 3 and they'd still be sauntering in, right? Because mom's threats mean nothing.
Because
And not that I
and
want
the
to
counting,
threaten, right?
that's how everyone expects parents to count. Like, you get to the number and then you're like,
Now I have to
you're,
do something about it.
it
Lazy
didn't
man.
matter. You got to 3, okay, now you're gonna go to 10. You get to 10, and it's not until you get up in their face, then they're like, oh, okay. Like,
Right. Yeah,
you set
because
that.
it's based on threatening,
Yeah.
right?
And power
Instead of
struggle.
instead of expectations that, okay, you didn't meet that expectation, there's a natural consequence for that, and the kids were, they're like, so what would the natural consequence be for, like, for these different scenarios? And I'm like, whatever, like, there's going to be natural consequences. And as I would describe, and, well, what do you think that, oh yeah, I don't really like that, like, that wouldn't be so good. Like, well, what if we don't do our chores? Well, then I guess you don't eat until your chore is done. Oh, okay, well, I'm going to do my chore. Like, everybody eats together when the chores are done. And maybe we eat at 10 o'clock at night. Well, that's too bad. Tomorrow you're probably going to get your chore done a lot sooner, right? Like, okay.
And I think
There's
modern women,
so many things that you could do.
I think modern women struggle more with this one than men, because you don't want them to not eat. Like, I remember we've had conversations where, when it came to food and punishments, or not the consequences, you have been like, but I don't want them to go hungry. I want our children to eat.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and it's not like I'm saying you go to bed without dinner. Like, if they can't do their chore and they choose to go to bed without dinner, that's their choice. Like, none of their chores are so hard that they can't get it done within, 15 minutes.
But it's different. It's different if it's like nobody gets to eat until everyone's done their chores, because then they self-police.
Yeah, there's peer pressure. Hurry up, do your chores. Some of them even help each other, and I've never had to do that. I've never said you can't eat until, but I have said, like, okay, we're gonna have a movie night, but we can't watch a movie until the chores are done. Oh my gosh, their chores are done so fast. Wow. Imagine if we did that every time, right? And it doesn't have to be this reward system that chores only get done if you can think of good enough rewards, because that's not allowing them to meet that expectation, right? That's setting up an expectation of, I only do something if I get some kind of reward, not just because it needs to be done.
We tried the reward system, but it kind of backfired, because it was like, oh, is that a big enough reward? If I don't care about that reward, whatever. Like, they would analyze, and sometimes, because we wanted them to do everything right, because there's full of rewards. We packed rewards, but then it got to the point where it's like, I'll only do the things that get me the rewards I want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, well, I mean, making my bed's only worth a quarter, so probably won't make my bed today. Like, whatever thing it is, right?
And then they got into the mindset where it was like, I'll only do something if there's a reward. That's also like, if you ask them for a favor, basically, all right, can you help me with this? It's like they're like, well, only if you pay me, only if you give me a reward. And it wasn't always money. For one point, it was like we were experimenting with money. But yeah, like, I was not. When it got down to it, I stopped offering them rewards basically at all for a while. So it was like, yeah, no, I'm not okay with this, so I'm just not giving out any rewards.
Yeah. Hey,
Get rid of this
your
habit.
chores? How much will you give me? Whoa, no, like, that's not cool. And so, not to say you can't use your
Yeah, it
voice,
was
and
like it was too far. Like, well, mom needs help with this, or I need help with this. Well, how much are you gonna give me? I was like,
right.
no, just that's not a. It
Service, man.
wasn't fostering an attitude of service, right? Yeah, it
Yeah,
was
right,
definitely.
right. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many things. That's my last tidbit, is just like, keep learning, keep trying, keep
Well,
applying.
definitely not perfect. We're not there yet, but
Like, people, I've had people ask, like how do you know all these things? How do you, like, I'm always learning new things. Like, I'm not like, oh, I've been parenting 15 years, I know it all. Like, I'm constantly looking for new stuff and new information, and sometimes I'm like, you know what? The old way was better. I'm going back to that. Like, sometimes you like try to improve something, and like, if it isn't broke, don't fix it, right? And but there's other ways I'm like, wow, that was totally broken. I didn't even know until I learned this new piece of information, and I'm so glad I did. So yeah,
yeah.
just keep learning, never
I mean,
stop.
and we presented that to our children of like, hey, we're not perfect, and we'll admit it when we're wrong. And I'd say that
And
goes
we'll
far.
apologize too. Hey,
We'll
I'm
like, yeah,
sorry.
like we'll say sorry to our children. We try to acknowledge our faults, and let our children know that, hey, we're not perfect, and but we're doing our best. So like, children will forgive you, but a bit of humility goes a long way for a parent.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember working with some teachers, and people who, when they said they were sorry, they might have been, pretty harsh or whatever, but they said they were sorry, and I was like, okay, I can deal with that. And then remember working with others who I'm like, I've never heard them say sorry in their life. Like, wow. And you just don't have a lot of respect for someone who can't admit, I'm wrong, I have some faults, right?
And that's a big one because I feel like media has erased, you know, that aspect of being humble when you're wrong. Like media, I rarely see in media someone actually apologize and acknowledge, like, no, I was wrong and I'm sorry. Like,
Yeah, they just make excuses for why their behavior was acceptable or whatever, and that's just not the kind of character we're hoping to foster in our
that's
children.
that's one thing that even if you're, like, the main reason I feel like it's important to apologize and be humble when you're wrong is because it's something your children are going to mimic. It's something they're going to see, oh, that's how you behave as an adult. That's how you ought to behave, is acknowledge when you're wrong and try to make it up.
Yeah,
If only do it for that reason alone, because it's a highly valuable skill as an adult, to get along with others, to get along in the workplace, and to have greater success in life as an
right.
adult.
Yeah, and ultimately everything that we teach our kids is like, the reason behind it is it's the right thing to do. And you might start off as, it gives you advantages, you get blessings, it's better than the consequence, whatever. But in the end, it comes down to, it's the right thing to do. And I've seen, as they've gotten older, that they are applying that. And some of the kids are doing things of their own free will and choice, without me telling them to do it, without you telling them to do it. And why? Because it's what needs to be done. It's the right thing to do. And that, like, makes me happy. Like, oh, they're learning, like, okay, I'm not failing in my parenting. They're understanding that you just do things because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yep. And in all, the best way to think of it is, you're a bit of a gardener as a parent, and you're trying to foster a strong oak tree. It takes 100 years for an oak tree to grow. Like, a parent never ceases to be a parent,
Yeah.
and the when, as you say, it's because it's the right thing to do. Like, helping children, you know in these principles, these gospel Christian principles. The more that children can be inculcated in the way they're raised to live God's law, the stronger, the straighter their foundation in life, the higher they'll reach. I feel that,
Yeah.
and the stronger they'll be in their faith and in the gospel, and the more they'll be able to do in God's kingdom and in the world, and
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're raising kids that only do stuff for a reward or to avoid punishment instead of doing it because it's the right thing to do, then what kind of leaders do we have for the future? We have people who don't do anything unless they feel like it. They
or
don't,
there's dollar signs behind it.
but yeah, they don't get out of bed unless they don't want to lose their job. Not because they want to go to work because it's the right thing to do, because it would let their boss down or whatever. It's just like, well, I don't want to lose my job. Like, okay. And I feel like that's what we have as a society. Not entirely, obviously there's wonderful people in the world, but there's a large part of society that they're just lazy and they don't do anything unless somebody is like holding their hand, threatening them, or offering some kind of reward. And that was something that I saw when I went to college. I remember teachers remarking that they loved homeschool kids that went to college. Now, this was years ago. There weren't that many homeschool kids going to college because homeschooling was like not that big of a thing like it is now. But when I was 20 some years ago, it was a big deal. Like, wow, we got this homeschool kid in our class. We have like 20 kids on campus who were homeschoolers or whatever. And they were self-starters. They read the syllabus, they turned their papers and things in on time. They didn't have to have a reminder. But all these kids who went through public school, they had, their teacher gives them a reminder, don't forget, Friday you have a paper due, don't forget, like they had that. Their mom and dad, like, oh, did you get your assignment done? Well, then they suddenly get to college, and college teachers don't give you a reminder. You have a syllabus. They might give you like one reminder, but if you didn't turn a paper in on time because they didn't remind you, that sorry, you still get an F. Like, you can make it up maybe, but they're not going to just like change the grade because, well, I didn't know, you didn't remind me. And that is something that I want like my kids to understand is it's not my job to remind you of everything. You have to make in your mind your own schedule, your own calendar. You have to recognize what's important. Hey, if I want to be a better percussionist, I have to practice every day without mom reminding me every day. I have to practice, right? And at some point, we want to be able to pass our children off to society that, they're 18, 20, whatever years old. They leave the home. I told the kids, does my mom call me and say, Christy, did you wake your kids up today? Christy, did you feed your kids breakfast? Christy, did you teach your kids school? Don't forget to take your kids to their lessons. Like, nobody's reminding me of those things. I do those because I have figured out what's important and what things I need to do. I'm not going to call my kids up when they leave the home and remind them of all the things. Did you apply for that loan? Don't forget, you need to go test drive a car. Like, they have to figure all that out on their own, and they can ask for help, but I'm not going to be their little reminder, to-do list reminder. And they have to be able to self-regulate, self-start. And if I am teaching them now that unless I nag or prod or give them a reward or give them a punishment, then I'm going to raise lazy adults who have no idea how to set an alarm and get up and go to work on time.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, and it's been a great conversation. There's so much wisdom to gain, and wherever you are, is embrace and give yourself grace to accept that's where you are. And I think the most important mindset that you mentioned, the most valuable piece of wisdom, is just have an attitude of learning, like desire to continue learning and to get better. That's the most valuable thing. To 1% improvements every day. That's the only way to improve, honestly.
Yeah. Compounding effect.
So, yep. Well, we'll go ahead and close with that. Thank you for listening, and hope you have a great week.
See you next time.